Welcome back to another very exciting tutorial here at the PhotoshopTrainingChannel.com. My name is Jesus Ramirez, and you can find me on Instagram at JRFromPTC. In this video, I'm going to show you how to create a realistic Pokéball in Photoshop. I must admit, I have not played Pokemon Go yet, but I figured that it would be a good idea to record a tutorial on creating the Pokéball. If you want to follow along, make sure that you head over to my website, ptcvids.com, and download the file for this tutorial. Also, while you're on there, make sure that you check out my new compositing course. There's a lot of good tips and techniques there. You can also find the link to it right below in the description. Okay, let's get started. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find the center of the image, and I'm going to use the rulers here to help me do that. So if you don't see them, you can press Control R, Command R in the Mac to enable them. Then you can right click on them and choose %. 50% is the center of the horizontal and vertical ruler. So you can click and drag a guide until you hit 50% on both the vertical and horizontal rulers. So that's the center of the image. Now we're going to create a ellipse that is going to revolve to make half a sphere. Now initially you might be thinking that creating a simple ellipse will do the job, but we actually have to cut that in half. And by the way, I held Shift and Alt, Shift and Option on the Mac, to create this perfect circle. We actually got to cut it in half so that we can revolve it in 3D space. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the Delete Anchor Point tool, and I'm going to delete the anchor point right here. Photoshop is going to tell me that this is going to turn a live shape into a regular path. And yes, I want to do that. So I'm going to click on that. Then I'm going to select the Direct Selection tool, click on the handle while holding Alt, Option on the Mac, and drag that handle until it snaps into the point there. Do the same thing for the point at the bottom. Click and drag while holding Alt, Option, and when it snaps, let go. So now we have half a circle. We no longer need our guides, so I'm going to press Control semicolon, that's Command semicolon in the Mac, to remove the guides. Then with this layer selected, I'm going to go into 3D, New 3D Extrusion from selected layer. And that's going to turn that half a circle into a 3D model. If I rotate it, you can see it there. Now obviously this doesn't look like half a sphere, but we're going to make some adjustments so that it does. The first thing that you need to do is click on this tab here, which is the Deform tab. Then under Horizontal Angle, you need to type 180, that's half a circle. And you need to make other adjustments. For example, the extrusion depth needs to be at 0. And back in the Deform tab, you need to adjust the deformation axis. Right now that center square is shaded. That's where the rotation is happening. We want to make it happen from one of the corners so that it's half a sphere. So if I click on the corner here, notice what happens. We get half a sphere. See that? Now that corner is selected. I can click on this Orbit 3D camera tool here to rotate the camera, and now we see what that looks like. What I'm going to do now is click on Current View, and under the View drop-down, select Front, so we can see what's going on a lot better. So there it is, Front. I'm going to click on the 3D model. It's going to select it here as you see, and then I can rotate around the x-axis to have the cutout facing down. But a better way of doing it is by clicking the properties here and typing 90 and hitting enter to accept the changes. I'm going to click and drag it up a little bit. And now we're going to work with the rest of the sphere, and then we're going to duplicate it and create the bottom half. So this top part is going to be red, and we're going to create some reflections, and we're going to adjust the lighting, and then we're going to work on the bottom part. So the first thing we're going to do is work on the lighting. I'm going to click on Infinite Light, and now I can control the light. And we're going to try to match the light in the scene. The light in the scene is coming from up here. You can see the shadows here under the car. They're pretty much right under the car. So it's maybe something like this. Note that this part might be a little bit brighter than any other part. So the light is probably coming from here down like so. So we can pretty much assume that this is going to be the light. Then we got to work with the color of the sphere. The extrusion material is what we got to worry about in this case. So under diffuse, you can double click on the color there to bring up the color picker, and you can choose a dark red about right here and press OK. Then we can apply the background as an image-based light so we can see some reflections on the actual sphere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Environment under Image-Based Lights. I'm going to select Remove Texture, and then I'm going to click on this icon and click on New Texture, press OK, and then I'm going to right click on that icon again and click on Edit Texture. There it is. Now I'm going to go back into the Layers panel of the project that we're working on, click on the street, which is the background. With the Move tool selected, I can click and drag it over onto the tab. When the tab switches over, you can continue holding the mouse button and release it in the middle. If you hold Shift, it's going to release it right in the center of the image. Then you can press Control S, Command S on the Mac to save. Then I can close this image-based light, and you're not going to see the reflection yet because we need to make some adjustments. So I'm going to double click on the 3D layer and go back into the extrusion material, the one that we switched to red, and increase the reflection roughly 23% or so. And notice the reflection. Now we see the trees being reflected, the building and the car, but we want to adjust it just because the reflections wouldn't necessarily be in front of the sphere because the tree and the car are both behind the sphere, or the Pokéball rather. So I'm going to click on the environment and I'm just going to rotate it just so we can see something different here. So maybe it's something like this. And this works okay for now. We may adjust it later if we need to, but for now this is going to work. I'm going to click on the ellipse and there it is. We have half a sphere with the reflections of the street environment. And what we're going to do now is just duplicate this and rotate it to the other side to create the bottom half. So we have the ellipse there. I'm going to right click on it and choose Duplicate Objects. There it is. And with this one, I could simply rotate around the y-axis, or I can just click on the coordinates here and just reset it. Type in -90, and there it is. Then I can click on it and drag it down, leave some space in between the top and bottom part, and then I'm going to change the color. So I'm going to open it up, select the extrusion material, and then select an off-white color. So maybe something like this, and press OK. So there you go. We have the top half and the bottom half. At this point, I'm going to put these two 3D layers into a group. So I'm going to click the ellipse 1 and drop it off on top of the ellipse 1, and I can rename them. The one on top is red, so I'll call it red. The one on the bottom is white, so I'll call it white. Then I'm going to go into the layers panel and I'm going to create one more ellipse right in the center here. And this is going to be that button in the center of the Pokéball. It's going to be about this big. Then I'm going to go into 3D, new 3D extrusion from selected layer. And that's going to be a 3D model there, as you can see. Notice that I rotated the camera. The Pokéball didn't move because we are in two different 3D layers. So we're going to work on this 3D layer. When we're done, we're going to merge the two onto one. So with this 3D layer selected, I'm going to select the ellipse number 2, click on the shape presets down pointing arrow here to see all the presets. And I'm going to select this one right here, which is bevel with contour. And it creates this contour that looks a lot like a button. So that's going to work for us great. I'm going to change the extrusion depth to 0. Then I'm going to click on the front inflation material, hold shift and click on the back inflation material. And I'm going to increase the reflection really high on all 5 materials. So maybe something like 90%. This is going to be a really reflective surface. Then under ellipse number 2, I'm going to right click on it and choose duplicate objects. This is going to be an inner button. So I'm going to scale it down a little bit and I'm going to push it out right about there and maybe make it just a little bit bigger. So something like that. And I'm just going to keep these two next to each other. And actually on the one on top, I'm just going to call outer. And the inner one, I will of course call inner. Then I'm going to go back into the layers panel. I'm going to select both layers by holding shift and clicking on both. Then I can either go to layer, merge layers, or simply press Control E, Command E on the Mac. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut just because it's a lot easier to use. So Control E, Command E, and that's going to merge these two 3D objects onto one layer. If I double click on it, you will see all the 3D elements that I have here, the red, the white, outer, and inner. I'm going to click on the red, hold shift, click on the white, selects both, and drag it down on top of the outer, and then I'm going to hold shift and click on inner so it selects all four, and I can press Control G, Command G on the Mac to put that into a group. In this group, I can call Pokéball. There it is. Now I gotta select the outer and inner and put that into a group. Control G, Command G on the Mac. And I'm just gonna call this one button for that center button. And I'm gonna click and drag it out. There it is. Obviously it's not facing the right way, but I can just reset it, or reset both rather. And there you go. And if I need to make any adjustments, I can do so. So let me just rotate the 3D element around a little bit just so I can see what it's looking like. I gotta push the inner one to the left a little bit. And what I'll do now is actually I'll go under current view and click on the camera and select front just so we can see the front part of it. And now I can align it properly. So click on the button and push it to the front right about here. And then I can rotate just to make sure that it's looking okay on all areas. And it looks like it is. Then I can push it inward. And I'll go back to the front just so I can see what's going on. So current view, click on the camera, front, and click on the button group. Click and drag it up right about here. And then I'm going to go back to the camera. And oops, I clicked on the wrong thing. I clicked on default. Go back to the camera under current view, click on the camera here and choose either left or right. So we'll go left just so we can see how far we can push that in. So I'm going to click on the button and push it in right about here. Then what I'm going to do now is work on the inner sphere that's going to be inside in between the red one and the white one. So I'm going to click on the white half sphere and right click on it and choose duplicate objects. And I'm going to click and drag that new object right under the original. And I'm going to call it black because this is going to be that black center sphere. And I'm going to make a few changes. I'm going to click on the deform tab here. And instead of 180, I'm going to choose 360 to get a complete circle. And I'm going to change the extrusion material to a very dark gray, almost black, so something like that. And it's a little too big, so I'm just going to scale it inward by clicking on this center cube, the yellow one there in the middle. It turns yellow when you hover over it, and it reads scale uniformly. So I'm going to click on it and scale it in. So there it is. The problem is that it's too reflective, so I'm just going to bring down the reflection on that one. So I'm going to click on the extrusion material, bring down the reflection, not all the way to 0, but pretty low, 5%. And this is what we have now. We have the Pokéball group with the red, white, and black spheres, the button with the outer and inner. And at this point, we're pretty much done creating the Pokéball, but we just got to make a few adjustments to make it fit within the scene and so that the ball looks as realistic as possible. So I'm going to click on the current view, go to front, just to make sure that everything's looking okay from the front. And the button might be a little too big, so I'm going to scale it in a little bit and push it out. And I'm going to rotate it just freely so I could see how much it sticks out. Actually, it might be a little too much, so I'll push it back in. So maybe something like this. And it's looking pretty good. Maybe this inner button's a little too big, so maybe I'll scale that one in as well. So maybe something like that. Okay, so now let's make sure that the overall 3D scene fits in with the photograph. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the camera so that the scene matches. So if you've seen my compositing course, then you know that one of the best ways of matching two different elements is to match the horizon line. So let's find the horizon line of this image. So there it is. On 3D, you can see that white line. That line there is the horizon line. So we got to match that horizon line with our scene. The horizon line is where the ground plane meets the sky. So on the photograph, it's down here somewhere. On the 3D scene, it's up here. So we just got to bring that down. One way of doing it is by clicking on current view and clicking on coordinates, and then we can adjust that camera around. You can click and drag on that X, or you can just put in the cursor inside of the type box and use the up or down arrow keys. So I'm using the arrow keys. So right about there, that's more or less where the horizon line would be. And notice how our ground plane now matches the street much better. So if I enable the Pokéball, I can select the Pokéball, the entire thing here, and I can move it around in 3D space. So maybe what I'll do now is go into 3D, move object to ground plane so it's actually sitting on the ground plane, and I can maybe rotate it so it's not facing straight forward. And you know what, now that I'm looking at this, I think I might have made a mistake in terms of where I placed that center button. I think it's not quite centered, so let me click on that and maybe just move it up just a little bit, and I'll rotate the entire thing again just to make sure it all looks good. Yeah, I think that's much better centered. So there you go, centered. And if the ball's a little too big, we can scale it down, of course. So maybe right about here. Again, 3D, move object to ground plane so it's always sitting on the ground. And you know what? I gotta go even smaller. So maybe something like that. 3D, move object to ground plane. It's always on the ground. So I'm gonna go back into the environment one more time, and I'm just gonna make sure that the environment matches the scene. So maybe something like this. That's looking much, much better. And I'm gonna press M on the keyboard, and I'm just gonna do a quick render. And this is just so I can tell that everything is working fine and there are no issues. So I'm gonna make a selection, click on the render button. It may take a little while because I'm selecting the entire 3D object, and I also have a lot of reflections and things like that, but that's okay. I just wanna make sure that everything's okay. And I'm not gonna go too long into the render, just enough so that I could tell that things are working. And you can just press escape to stop the render. And the one thing that I may do is actually maybe work on the shadow a little bit, and I'm gonna move the infinite light around. So I'm gonna click on the move tool and move the infinite light about that much. Also, I'm gonna increase the softness of the shadow. So maybe 29, 30% will be okay. And I think this is gonna work. What I'm gonna do now is just do a final render. Once it's done rendering, I'm gonna come back into Photoshop and we're just gonna do some finishing touches. So I'm gonna press M on the keyboard, make that same selection I made earlier, click on render, but this time I will pause the video until it's done rendering. Okay, Photoshop just finished rendering the 3D model. So I'm gonna press Ctrl D, Command D to deselect. And the first thing I'm gonna do is go into the layers panel and press Ctrl J, Command J on the Mac to duplicate that layer. I'm gonna right click on it and choose rasterize 3D layer. So now that 3D layer is just a regular pixel layer, it's not 3D anymore. And we're gonna work with this layer just to make the final adjustments. So I'm gonna add a new hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm gonna bring down the saturation, and I just wanna make sure that the luminance values of the environment matches the luminance values of the ball. Notice that the ball is just a little too light. So I'm gonna click on the ellipse 1 copy, which is the final Pokéball. So I'll call it final Pokéball. And the 3D layer, I'll call that one Pokéball 3D. Okay, so there we go. We have the two layers labeled so we know what they are. So on the final Pokéball layer, I'm going to create a new levels adjustment layer. I'm going to clip it to the layer below it, Control-Alt-G, Command-Option-G on the Mac, or you can click on this icon here, and then move the luminance values. It will only affect the Pokéball, and now you're just going to make sure that the darkest part of the car matches the darkest part of the ball, and the same thing for the lights, because they're roughly in the same area, and they're made out of roughly the same material, so they should be matching. Notice that without the adjustment layer, the Pokéball is just a little too bright. With it, it matches the scene a little bit better, and we can actually adjust it even further. Maybe make the darks a little bit darker and the lights a little bit brighter. Create a little more contrast like this. So that's before and that's after. And in black and white, everything seems to match pretty good. I'm going to disable the hue and saturation adjustment layer, and you'll see how the 3D ball looks much better than without it. Now the problem now is that we adjusted the color. So we only want to adjust the luminance. So I'm going to click on luminosity so the colors are not affected. And now that I'm looking at it, I think the effect might have been a little too strong. So I'm going to bring that down with the opacity. So now that I see the color, it might be a little too strong. So I'm going to create a new hue and saturation adjustment layer. I'm going to clip it to the layer below it. Another problem I see is that it's a little too saturated. So I'm going to just bring the saturation down just a tiny bit. So again, so that this matches with the objects around it. And finally, I'm going to create a color lookup adjustment layer. And this is so that we can apply one overall effect to the entire image. This is something I like to do in compositing just to make the entire scene come together as one. So I'm going to just select fall colors. And it creates this really interesting effect, but that's not what I'm going for. So I'm just going to bring the opacity way down to 0 and then increase the opacity very, very slightly so that we get a hint of those colors. So that's before and after. And notice how those colors are applied to the entire image, both the foreground and the background. So it kind of helps it come together a little bit more. Finally, I'm going to press Control, Alt, Shift, E. And I call that keyboard shortcut the smash your head onto the keyboard shortcut because you have to press a whole bunch of keys. So Control Alt Shift E, Command Option Shift E on the Mac, and that takes everything in your scene, merges it onto one layer as a copy, and puts it on the very top. So there it is. And what we're gonna do in this layer is we're gonna apply some noise. So I'm just gonna call it noise. And that's another thing I like to do to make a composite come together. So we're gonna add just a tiny bit of noise. I'm gonna go into Filter, and we're going to use the lens blur. This filter usually adds blur to an image, but if you bring down the radius down to 0, it adds no blur, and it's got a noise setting that you can add. And I like using this filter for noise just because I think I get good results. So something like an amount of 4 will be okay, and you can look at uniform or Gaussian and see which one looks better. Uniform works. I don't want it monochromatic. I want just a little bit of color in there. So I'm just going to press OK, and I'm going to zoom in just so that you can see what we did. So this is before, and that's after. And maybe you can even bring down the opacity if the effect is too strong. So just a little bit of noise just to help everything fit together. So that's before and after, and I can fit into the screen, and that's our final result. And that's it for this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it and that you learned something new. If you create an image using this tutorial, feel free to share it on Instagram with the hashtag PTCVids. I often do a search for this tag to see what you're all up to. If I find your image, I will leave you a comment. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click on that like button. If you have a friend who would enjoy this tutorial, then share the link with them now. Thank you for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.